This video will show you how to gather requirements using Requiment, and for that we're going to use a demonstration project, just a very small demonstration project. And the idea is that a housing association wants a web application where properties will be listed for rental, and potential clients or tenants can raise inquiries about a property. So basically, tenants can browse properties and raise inquiries against those properties. Quite a simple application, but it's something that is quite common out there. Okay, so let me show you Recruitment. So this is the main page after I've logged into Recruitment, and this is project page. So we have no project, so I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it the Housing Association Portal, because it's a portal for displaying properties for rental. I'll just leave notes here. You can put notes in on your project. I'm just going to leave those for quickness. And now we're into basically a requirements capture form that we have within the system. So I can put in a system description. So I'm just going to put something very short here because we want to do this as quickly as possible for demonstration purposes. So this is a portal to allow tenants to view rental properties and raise an inquiry against a property. Okay, we asked this question, system quality. What quality should the system be? We have a few options here. This is really just to help people who are perhaps estimating how long the system would take to build, or indeed to build it, just to let them estimate the amount of work in here. So let's just say it's a minimum viable product. We're going to do the absolute basics to get this product working. So that's the level of quality we're looking for. Okay, so next section is users. So we ask, how does the user access the system? So in this drop down, we can say there's no login required, and various options around login. Basically what we want is self-service sign up here and login. So I'm going to say login is required, and we're going to allow tenants to sign up. We're going to allow them to sign up using their email. We can also choose one of these options as well, or many of them if we want. So I'm going to say we're allowing people to sign up using their Facebook account as well. And then the next part is we ask for user types. So we have to think, what types of users would we have on the system? So I've already mentioned tenants, because those would be the people who would log in and browse properties. But we also have some sort of admin user, we're assuming, at the housing association, who would actually put properties onto the site and manage properties and look after inquiries. You could have lots of different user types. You could have an admin, you could have another office user, etc. But for this purpose, we're going to create two. So what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say there is a user type of an admin, and say that admin can manage property listings and inquiries. So the admin, I'm assuming, will receive inquiries and can deal with those. We also have a tenant. So I'm going to say a tenant is a type of user. So a tenant, I'm not going to put a user type description just to keep this demonstration as short as possible, but obviously we just say this somebody who can browse properties and raise inquiries. Okay, so then it's asking for some more details. So do you want forget password functionality? Do you want two-factor authentication? And we would just say we want password functionality required here just for quickness. Then the next thing we have is entity. We can then, the main part of the requirement spec will probably deal with entities. An entity is a thing that makes up the system. Generally, you might see these things on pages within a system, and if you were to write a text description of a system, then entities are generally nouns within there. So for example, you saw in the description I had before, I mentioned about properties and inquiries. So a property would be an entity, an inquiry would be an entity. You might ask if tenants and admins are entities. Well, they're users there as well. They could have some entity properties, but that's a bit more advanced. So let us create an entity here. And I'm just going to say new. I'll come back to from library here. So I'm just going to click new. And what we're going to do is we're going to select property. So I'm going to create the definition of a property. So a property which is available for rental. So if you think about property and you think about something that you would have on a portal, then you'll have a number of details that are listed there. So we'd say these are entity fields. So we'd have like a field name. So for example, the housing association might have a property reference number here. And we allow the type of that field to be defined, because this is pretty useful for when people go to define and write the system. So I'm going to say that this is an ID number. It's some sort of identifier, and it is indeed an identifier for the housing association. I'll say this is I'll say it's the property reference as used by the housing association. So I can put a description in here. And I can put field validation rules in here. So yet again, this is just notes to allow people to decide how software developers really who would be writing this, what's required on this field. So I'm going to say this field would be mandatory. We always want to have a property description, a property reference number. And I'm going to say it's a 12 alpha numeric character item. So I'm basically saying that this is a 12 character string, basically a sequence of characters made up of letters and numbers, because that's the standard for the housing association. So I could say example AB 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, for example. Here might be an example. Yet again, this is very good to just be absolutely crystal clear on what these things are, and that's a quick way of doing it. Okay, so you'd have the property reference number. We might have the address of the property as well in here, and obviously we could add various fields for the first line of the address, the second line of the address, the city, the region, the postcode, etc. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another way of doing that, because you can have one entity which references another. So in some systems, the address might be an entity because it's used in various places. For example, we might have the address of the tenant as well as the address of the property. So it would make sense to have an address entity to store those, just to define what addresses look like within the system. I'm not going to have that for users here, but for property, I'll show you how we could actually do that. So we have this library of common entities. Requiment is in beta at the minute, so we're working on this. But just to give you an indication of entities that we could actually add. So I'm going to say I'm adding an entity here, and I have a choice of various entities, and we will probably refine and grow this list over time within the product. But I have address here. So what I can do here is I can add address, and the address entity will be added here. So we now have a property and we now have an address. You'll see that all the fields have been defined. All the actions have been defined except for the action user, because we're not sure what users we have at the minute. So I'm basically going to say to create an address, an admin can create an address. To read an address, I'm going to say that, and I'll go back to entity actions in a second to explain a bit more about these. But basically, I have to set up my action entity actions here, but I will explain in a second. So let me go back to property fields, and I will add address here to a property. This is me saying that a property will have an address, and I'm saying that it's an entity single, because remember I've defined an address, so it's one address, I'm going to have here, and the entity type is address. So, and that's the address of the property. I'm not going to put in validation rules just for quickness here. I could also have the photo of the property. I could have obviously more than one photos, but for general purposes, I'm just going to say I have a photo here. I could also have within here, let's say monthly rental, and this is the rental for the property, and I'll put that in as a number. Yeah, again, we're just zipping through this just to make it as quick as possible. Okay, entity actions. You saw me start to look at entity actions before. Entity actions are things that you would do on an entity, the operations you might perform on an entity. So, for example, in software development, most entities will have these actions: create, read, update, delete. In software engineering, we call them CRUD methods, CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And what we're doing here is we are looking at the property entity and we're saying what actions can be performed on that entity. More importantly, as well, who can perform them. So, can we create a property? Yes, we can. Who can do that? The admin, not the tenant, because the tenant can only browse properties. Who can read properties? Well, the admin, we're saying, can do everything. Tenant can read properties because they can go and browse properties and actually see a property. Who can update a property? Well, yet again, a tenant doesn't have permission to do that, so it's an admin. And finally, let's look at delete. Who can delete a property? And the admin can delete. These entity auxiliary actions, I will explain about them once we get on to inquiries, because I want to show you an example of one. So that's kind of basic actions, but you might want to add some other actions. So you might say, actually, there's the ability to search properties. So who can do this? Admin, tenant. In here, I may want to say an auxiliary action. I may want to put note. Please note that search will be performed on address and or property ref number. So we're just giving a bit more detail here. It's the yet again, this is beta, so it's an area system that we may improve on, but it's kind of making you think that you have to define some of the actions that you've got and the auxiliary actions that are performed. Yeah. Okay, so I'll show you some of the other actions that we can have, but I won't add any more. So we can have things like merge if we want to merge records, import if we want to, let's say the admin want to import a CSV of records, let's say they want to export records, etc., etc. We have a number. You can also set up your own entity action, so you can say it's another, and you can say you want to, I don't know, you might have an action that says an AI audit of the property for some reason, don't know, something that you want to call, I don't know. So that just gives you an idea of the fact that you're not limited to the actions that are in the product. Okay, so let me go back to address here and just update that, because we had an update here, and I think we said for address, admin would only update that. Delete, admin would only delete an address, and in terms of listing addresses, well, tenant and admin would probably be able to list or search. I'll just say search here, just to get that. Okay, so that's, I have the property address, the property entity, and I have the address entity. I'm going to add another entity now, which is for, if you remember, we had inquiry. So I'm going to add inquiry here as an entity. I've created the entity, I've clicked on it, and inquiry. I'm going to say this is inquiry on a property. Okay, and let me add some of the fields here. Just I'm going to say this the property reference number. What field do we, it's an ID number, the ID of the property that we're actually referencing, that we're actually going to raise an inquiry against. We also would want the tenant email address, what the raising inquiry, so how do they want us to get back to them, so I'll put in an email here. Yet again, we would add field notes, etc., validation rules, but for quickness, I'm just going through as quickly as possible, so I'm not filling out everything that you really should here. I'm also going to say the notes, what the actual inquiry is about. It's just a text here, and I think that's all I need for the inquiry. I could add obviously extra fields. We could put date. In fact, I'll put date and time. So let's put the date that the inquiry was raised, and this is a date, and let's put the time. The idea here is that in some of these situations where folk are applying for renting property, the person that gets in first gets the option of renting the property first, perhaps. And here we have entity actions. Yet again, who can create an inquiry? Well, an admin can create one, but a tenant can also do that as well. This is where we can use entity auxiliary actions as well to say when a tenant creates an inquiry, then the tenant will be emailed a confirmation that the inquiry has been lodged, if that makes sense. Okay. Again, let me just for completeness put in a read here. Who can read an inquiry? Well, the admin can read it. We'll show the tenant can show that as well. Really, a lot of these are business decisions, but the good thing about having entity actions here is that it makes you ask at each level who can do what, and it's really important to do that. Otherwise, you end up with really vague requirements, and when you have vague requirements, you get really vague estimates, and projects tend to go awry if things aren't defined in a reasonably rigorous manner. So update, who can update an entity, an inquiry? I'm going to say the admin can update it. I'm not going to allow the tenant to update it. Just a business decision. Who can delete it? Again, I'm going to say the admin. And who can list these or search them? I'm going to say the admin can list. Okay. So that's 3 entities I've defined. So it's also a very small system. You could have a bigger system here, but let's talk about entity relationships, which is the next section. So entity relationship is what is the relationship between each entity. So this allows us to kind of understand the structure of the data and how it relates to each other. So I can say, think of relationships. I've got a property, and the property has only one address. Yep. I can say, let's say a property can have 0 or more inquiries. So an inquiry relates to a property, and that's the way we've defined the system there. So that just gives you an idea of how you set up relationships within. But these are quite good because yet again it lets people understand how data relates to each other, especially the people who are going to go on and write this system. Next is reports. So we want to define reports. Reports we find is one of the big areas of the system that people kind of struggle to define, and the reports get kicked down the road generally, and don't get estimated properly and don't get defined properly. So it's always good to think about them up front. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make you think about reports. So first report, or I'm just going to put one report in here. So I'm going to say inquiries per month. So I'm interested in how many inquiries are we getting per month. So I'm going to say inquiries per month, and I'm going to say grouped by month. Example, January 10, February 15, etc. So really just we'll show the number of so I could say this is January 2022, February 2022 here, just to be rigorous with it here. Which users can view the report? Well, this is for the admin, really. How is the report generated? Well, it's going to be generated manually, so the admin will generate this. Which users can generate the report? Admin users can generate it, so admin can generate it and admin can review it, because sometimes you might have reports where somebody can generate it, but somebody else views it. What type of report is it? It's a list. What entities are included in the report? Well, I'm just going to say inquiries here. We could join it with property and address if we wanted to give details of the property, but I'm just going to say that this is, because this is effectively counting the number of inquiries per month, then we'll just say inquiry. And we're going to display this on a web page rather than on a PDF. And this makes a difference because, oops, sorry, I don't want to click graph here. This makes a difference because it might be more work for somebody to display something on a web page on Excel or a PDF than it would just on a web page. So we asked for what's the format of the report. Will the report include any sorting capabilities? Yes, it will. Will the report include any filtering capabilities? And you probably have to put these in additional information at the end of the document if you wanted to define what these were or define them in the description of the reports. I could say sorting is chronologically by month. Filter, and I'm going to say filter between two dates. Yet again, this is beta, so we might change this around. We're really putting it out to beta to get people's view on what is effectively a simple product at the minute, and get some ideas on things that we can change to make them better. So next to have things like features, which just asks a lot of things around, a lot of questions really around various parts of the system. It's a part that is in beta at the minute. It's a fairly general section. So something we're working on at present. We don't know whether it will stay in the system. We don't know whether we'll take it out and define things more on entities. But it is there, so you can answer these questions. Yet again, always good to detail in requirements. So we'd rather ask more questions and ask for more detail than ask for less detail. Next, we have usability requirements. So ask a few questions like should the system follow accessibility guidelines? So I'll just say follow EAA guidelines here. So this makes you think about, are there any accessibility guidelines to be followed? Will the system have multilingual support, multi-time zone, multi-currency? Well, I'm going to say for the Housing Association that they have to display things in multilingual. Will the user interface be responsive, as in will it display in a mobile format as well as web format? Well, we want people to use this on a mobile phone, so yes. Design guidelines would be things like follow the Housing Association design colours, for example, or design guidelines. It's just does system have a user manual? No. Require online help? No. Video guides? No. We're not going to put these in, but we could select these. Security requirements, any specific access requirements here as well can be defined. Privacy requirements, I'm not going to type these in here. You might. In fact, I'll give you an example of specific access requirements, and you could say must follow the Housing Association password policy. And I could define what that was in here. It's the mix, upper, lower characters plus number plus symbol. That makes sense. So that might be an example of something that you'd actually put in there. Describe the privacy requirements. So the tenant must accept terms and privacy policy of site. Yet again, just remind you to do these things. Will the data be encrypted at rest? Yes, it will. Will the data be encrypted? So these are data security requirements, and yet again, more data security requirements here. Good things to have in requirements documents. We have performance requirements like, all pages must respond within 0.5 seconds. So the idea here is that you're being very specific. So it means that the requirement specs are a contract between somebody developing a system and somebody who wants a system. So if you put something like this in, it's quite rigorous. It means that there's no disagreement with somebody saying the system appears slower than I thought it would be. So it's been defined. You just time how long the pages take. If it's always less than half a second, that requirement has been met. We can put in number of users here, number of users in year 1, number of users in year 2. Yeah, again, this is quite good. It's good for people to know what size of system we're dealing with. Are we dealing with a 1 user system, a 10 user system, a million user system? These all make a difference to the software engineers who are defining this. So I'm just going to put some numbers in here randomly. Here, yeah. So, and in terms of reliability requirements, what are the reliability requirements? Well, must be available 99.999% of time. So that allows anybody developing the system to determine whether it's going to be down for 15 minutes a year or 15 minutes a week or whatever for updates or whatever. So yeah, again, that makes a difference. Supportability requirements. I'm just going to say must be supportable by housing association frontline staff. So you're hoping that the frontline staff can handle queries from tenants. So there's some level of support involved there. Legal requirements, I could say something like a tenant, system must follow GDPR and allow tenant to delete their account, just as an example, and data. Yep. And system requirements, we're basically asking here, is the system browser-based or is it an application running on a platform is it running on an iPhone as an application, or running Windows like an application like Word or the way Word or PowerPoint, or is it running in a browser? And we're saying this is a browser-based that's running here. And then we're asking, yet again, important details. What browser or platform should the system run on? And we're going to say that it should run on Chrome, Edge, and Safari on Windows and Mac. It's also quite important that we ask that it's good practice to say versions are versions released, excuse my English, after 2017. So we're in 2022 just now. So this is really just saying if it should run on any version of Chrome, Edge, Safari, on Windows or on the Mac for versions are where the version is released after 2017. Very specific. If somebody brings a 2010 version of a browser, it might work, but it's not in the requirements for the system. So if it doesn't work, that's fine. We're only targeting people after 2017. For the web system, are there specific hosting requirements? We can say the Housing Association, I'm just going to call it HA, standard is for AWS. So it must support AWS. have additional information where we can record some additional information in here, and I have a glossary of terms here. So I can put in terms if I want, so I can say, I can only think of property here, but I will. Yeah, I'm just going to say property. Yet again, somebody is actually reading through the requirement specification and they come across the word property. Of course, it's an entity there, and I've already described it, but this just allows you, we can just create a glossary of terms in here. So that's the requirements kind of captured in the system very quickly. What we can do is we can generate a document here. So in order to generate a document, click on Documents, click on Generate here, and you'll see the document is now generating. And this takes a few minutes. So in beta here, we just have a refresh button, just see when it's generated. So it's now completed, and we will now download the document. So you see the document downloaded here, and what you have is effectively a Word document here. So it's a very simple Word document. You can, it just shows the answers to the questions. We yet again, we're hoping to make this a bit more explicit here. But you see all the questions and answers. So you can either use this and add things that were not added in the system, put in images, etc. Or you can obviously cut and paste bits out of this and put it in your own particular requirements template. But the system, the real power of the system, I believe, is really that we're quite rigorous about asking things. So it's a really, even if you did have your own particular requirement spec, the system is a good way of just making sure you've got things noted and that you're quite rigorous with defining things. And if there is anything missing, then please do give us feedback. Okay, so that's a Word document. We also have something else as well, because we have effectively a structured requirements capture. What we can do, and this is yet again in beta, is we can produce wireframes. So wireframes are great. They're basically just kind of very rudimentary mock-ups of screens, just to show people what the system might look like. Just what we find in requirements capture, and what a lot of people find, is that if you just show folk a document and get them to show them a list of fields in a table, for example, for an entity, then they sometimes miss things. If you show them a page, it just seems to, for some reason, it just seems to let them think about how the system's going to be used. So very rudimentary, but we have like property here. So I've got an entity, so I can show like a page. Let me show a create page for property. So this is what a very, very simple create page might look like for a property. It's not fully functional. Obviously, it's just a wireframe, but it does allow people to look. So let's say, what would a search page look like? So you would see we've got a search bar here, it's a property list, we've got the property reference number, the address, etc. So very, very simple. In inquiry, what would inquiry look like? You know, we have a create for an inquiry, and you'll see we've got the property reference number. You see we actually do have things like dates in here, so you can, if you want, actually go in and click dates and times, and you can play about with these. If that makes sense, you can put in a property number here, but there's no validation on these. It's really just pretty simple. But we thought it's quite a useful feature to have in. Yet again, we'd love to hear what you think of that feature. So, as I say, this is Requiment. It is in beta. If you do want to give us any feedback, then please go to www.requiment.com and give us your feedback there. And thanks for your time.